Hi there. Welcome to Phil PCI SAQs yourself again. So this is really, the home stretch for SAQ-A, and today we are going to discuss about Appendix B, which is the Compensating Controls Worksheet. So a compensating control, in the context of information security or any other subject for that matter, is something that has to be present in the absence of the original control which was prescribed by the framework or the guidance. And the compensating control should provide adequate security measures, so to the extent that the original control provided as well, and sometimes even exceeds the information security standards of the original control, prescribed by the original control. So the compensating control, again, just to make things clear, the compensating control should be set or implemented to provide the same rigor and intent of security when it compares to the original control. So if there is a control which cannot be implemented, for example, let's say some are mandatory requirements, but let's say if we go to just throwing a random example here. So if, let's say, your organization does not currently use or if the applications or systems does not currently use or have the capability to use passwords or token devices or biometric elements for a multi-factor authentication, you will need to develop compensating controls that will manage the that will basically be used to satisfy the same rigor and intent of this requirement. So you'll have to demonstrate something, and the details of those should be captured here. Okay, so this is what the compensating control worksheet is basically. So one more example. Let's say you have a web application server, for example, and let's say there's a web application hosted in there. If that web application has, for example, a lot of vulnerabilities with it, so let's say it has cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, and OWASP top 10 type of vulnerabilities there, and you cannot immediately remediate it for some reason, then you can probably place a web application firewall in front of the web application server, so that the web application firewall can withstand prevent and detect application security related attacks such as cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgery, for example. That's one thing. And the other thing is, let's say, so that is just one example, right? And I have this blog open from Sprinto. They are a compliance framework platform, and so you can see here they have also given an example. To understand this better, let's take the example of multi-factor authentication, which is a requirement for access to remote devices. So if, for example, one of your administrators or you are trying to access a device or a server or a database, etc., you'll need to mandatorily have two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. Okay, but then if you are unable to satisfy a requirement related to password encryption, you cannot use multi-factor authentication as a compensating control for the password encryption. Now, for the if you're not able to satisfy any particular requirements for password encryption, you can think of additional requirements like maybe make 25 characters password, or maybe yeah, or with very strong letters and characters, numbers, etc., right? That is just one example. Other examples could be thought of. Okay, this has to be very very carefully thought of with kind of with specific expertise. Okay, you can see here that they have just taken an example. So let's say your organization is not able to encrypt cardholder data to make it unreadable, which is a mandatory requirement. But let's say you are unable to do it because of business constraints and because of technical constraints, etc. In this case, you can leverage other compensating controls to address this gap using devices, software, and controls. So, for example, you can use internal network segmentation to completely separate the cardholder database from all of the other existing infrastructure that you have, and that you can use IP or MAC address filtering to literally only allow devices which literally allow access, should be accessed, to access that, and then implement multi-factor authentication within the internal network as well. So those are some of the things, but again, has to be carefully discussed. I do not foresee organizations like small and medium-sized businesses, having to fill this. But this is, in my experience, honestly, I've seen this one, being filled in like level 1 audits. So organizations which is more than, like 6 million transactions. So here in this document, you'll have to fill the constraints. So what are the constraints where because of which you are not able to, taking the example, encrypt cardholder data in storage, for example. And then what are the compensating controls you have? What was the objective of the original control? So for example, the objective of the original control was to prevent cardholder data from being read, even if they are, let's say, even if they fall in bad hands, for example. And then what is the objective that you're trying to meet by the compensating control? The objective should be the same, but it should meet the rigor and intent of the original control. So are there, so after you implement the original control, will there be any additional risks posed by the lack of the original control? So those risks should be maintained, and those risks should be very low, the residual risks. And then how will you test the new controls? So all these three things, right? So if you kind of let's say implement this, if you don't have encryption in place, so how will you make sure that these are regularly tested, right? So maybe an internal pen test every year, or maybe some sort of other testing for these things as well. And then so what is your processes and controls in place to maintain compensating controls? That's the gist of it. Please note that once the compensating controls cannot be, although it's not written, but it cannot be, let's say, implemented forever. So you should ideally, try and implement the original control that is stated by the PCI DSS requirement. And then I think that's the end of this SAQ-A. So I'll complete the video series here, but I'll quickly go over these. So again, Appendix C, explanation of requirements noted as not applicable. So here you'll have to note all requirements. So for example, if physical security is not applicable, then you'll have to mention all the requirements mentioned here, 9.4.11 to all the way up to 9.4.4, and then you can mention that it's not applicable because you don't have a data center or something like that. This is not used. The Appendix D is not used for SAQ-A. And then, once you're done, you can just mention as compliant or non-compliant, which is not an option, or compliant with legal exception, have not seen. Let's not go over these. Let's not overcomplicate it. So you can just select this box. You'll have to tick all these boxes, mentioning that, you have basically stated that you have done, everything with due diligence. Here you'll need to sign, either with an electronic signature or a physical signature. Part C is not required, QSA, because this is a self-assessment questionnaire. You can, however, use a QSA if you have money and time, and they'll basically do an additional check from their side. They'll charge you money, and they'll sign it off as well. It does not necessarily mean that this will give more credibility. No, on second thoughts, it will give more credibility, but it's because they're specialized to do so. But it is not legally required by the PCI Council, because this is a self-assessment questionnaire. You do not need an internal security assessment involvement for this as well. You can self-assess it yourself. You can fill in the questionnaire yourself. If you have any non-compliant requirements, you need to basically develop action plans and mention which one do you not have, and then you'll have to put timelines. And once you put those timelines in, once you achieve those action plans, then you can come back and become compliant again. Yeah, but if you have action plans for non-compliant requirements, that means you would have selected this one. You are non-compliant, so that means you are not compliant with one or more sections. Well, that's it. I think that's the end of the video series for SAQ-A. I think I'm gonna start with SAQ-D next, because that's the next most common questionnaire that I have seen that merchants or service providers have to fill in. So that's what I'm going to start next. Thanks so much for visiting my channel. Please do like and subscribe if you liked my video, and yeah, hoping to see you again in a future video. Thanks, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you. Bye.